that in order to get into the fullness of the likeness of God, as Paul called it, the full stature of Christ, we have to suffer in order to get there. Here's a verse that people don't often quote. It's Hebrews 2:10. We all know that Jesus is perfect, but how did he get perfect? Hebrews 2:10 says that the captain of our salvation, Jesus, was made perfect through suffering.
I'm trying to think of times when I personally was in a huge rut. Sometimes hearing this stuff could feel annoying.
Yeah.
Like if somebody else, like if I heard someone on TV go, okay, be thankful. You can't, it's hard when you're in a pit. It's like you almost have to say it to yourself. You have to, if somebody else tells you to be thankful, somehow that can be annoying. But if you're in that rut and you're like, no, I'm choosing for myself to be thankful because I know that will help me. And you begin to list those things. I feel like there does have to be a commitment almost. I almost feel like when things are really good, that's when you need to be like, okay, I'm not always gonna feel great. You know, maybe in a couple weeks I'm not gonna feel good, but I'm going to choose like to be thankful. I'm going to make a choice when that time comes to be thankful. So I'm equipped to get out of the rut.
It's voluntary. It's of your own volition. And here's what Paul said. He said, be anxious for nothing, but in everything, with prayer and supplication and thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. That word guard in the Greek language is used of a prison sentinel. So it will, the prison sentinel of peace will stand guard over your thoughts when you keep them captive. Paul said, take your thoughts captive. The security guard of peace will make sure that peace and your thoughts stay captive in your heart and your mind. When you not only pray with your supplication and request, but with thanksgiving. And I found this in my prayer times, not to get overly uber Pharisaic here talking about my prayer times, but this has been huge for me, is sometimes I believe God will just tell me, Ben, start thanking me for stuff. And then I start going through this list after telling him my problems and stuff I'm going through. I start to go through this list of all the things that God has done for me in prayer. And when I start giving thanks, I'm like, I feel so much peace. Yesterday I was at a book signing and just writing in people's books, and somebody came to me and said, you know, Ben, how do I overcome this feeling that, you know, the glory days are behind me, my best days are behind me? And what I said to him is, every time you think of how these amazing memories are in your past, that's a motivator to remind you of how good God's gonna be in the future. If he did that in your past, what's he gonna do in your future? It's not glory to gory, it's the other way around, is the gospel story.
That's a big part of it, isn't it? The past. Like there's so many people that are dwelling on what they used to have.
You're right.
You know, when you lose someone you love, or maybe you go through a bad divorce, or a lot of, you know, empty nesters. I used to have my family, my kids moved out, I'm feeling lonely. That so much is like dwelling on everything I've lost. And how does somebody, if they're feeling that way, it's hard to believe, especially as we get older, you know, and our health isn't as good, and our opportunities aren't as good. A lot of people have lost their jobs during COVID.
That's true.
It's like, it's so hard sometimes to have faith, to really believe that something better is coming. What do you say to someone who's just like, man, I used to have this amazing life and it's gone, and I'm trying to build it, but it's just so hard to believe that tomorrow could be better than yesterday.
I would tell them, we are forged by adversity. We are forged by adversity. This is called, in theological terms, John Hick's Iranian theodicy, and it's an ancient biblical Christian philosophy. In order to get into the fullness of the likeness of God, as Paul called it, the full stature of Christ, we have to suffer in order to get there. Here's a verse that people don't often quote. It's Hebrews 2:10. We all know that Jesus is perfect, but how did he get perfect? Hebrews 2:10 says that the captain of our salvation, Jesus, was made perfect through suffering. And I just want to remind you that God is not the cause of evil. I do not believe that God is the cause of suffering. He is the God and Father of all lights. Every good and perfect gift comes from him. But when the enemy seeks to harm you, just remember, God can redeem it, and he can use that as a soul-making theodicy, that every adversity you go through forges you, so that God is a consuming fire who never burns what you are. He only burns what you are not. And that fire isn't burning you, it's forging you. So don't be surprised by these fiery tribulations, because here's what I would say. Every fire that you go through is forging your spirit into steel, and it's tempering your soul into iron. And every successful person, by the way, not to get all motivational speak here, but this is true, they learn to reframe pain. Because if you don't retrain your brain, you're just always gonna think about all the bad things that have happened to you.
What do you mean reframe pain?
So like for me, as you know, Bobby, I've shared this before, but my brother died and my sister died, and I have a stalker who follows me around. He was protesting so loud at a Florida event I was doing a few weeks ago digitally that he caused a car accident. I mean, and you go through this stuff, and sometimes I sit there and I'm like, my life's terrible. Like I can start to think that. I mean, my counselor said I had one of the most difficult cases of depression she'd ever had to treat.
Wow.
So you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And then after getting diagnosed with complex PTSD, and I don't want to just throw that around lightly. I didn't even know what complex PTSD was until she diagnosed me with it.
What is it?
It means that you don't just go through one trauma, you go through a whole series, and it's too much for you to assimilate. So what happened in my situation is...
I mean, of course you did, though. I mean, you lost your brother, your sister, that's...
And I almost tried to commit suicide a few times.
Bro, that's a lot.
And
that is a lot to go through.
Yeah, so there were times, and I'm just gonna be honest. And in fact, the video that we just played, that was a very hard season when we filmed that thankfulness video.
Was it really?
I remember in that pumpkin patch that we were walking through, I was
like, I don't
hating
wanna be
life.
here.
I didn't want to be there. And I look back now and I'm like, God, heaven is so real. I believe it. I'm gonna see my brother and sister again, and I'm so thankful for the time I had with them. And it's not just in the past, in the future, I'm gonna see them again. And if I really believe that, I'm reframing my pain and realizing that now I can help all these other people who've lost their loved ones. And so if you can reframe your pain and see it in a way that is actually advantageous, that what the enemy intends for evil, God means for good, then suddenly you really can be thankful in all things.